what? If some of you softies insist on sleeping on the bed, I reckon you can do worse than a Luffler Easy Rest. End of commercial.
He was the face of one of the most beloved shows in television history. But now, decades later, a co-star is finally breaking their silence. What really went on behind the scenes of The Andy Griffith Show? And why has no one spoken up until now? Join us as we dig into the story they never told. Until now. From small-town roots. Andy Griffith was born on June 1, 1926, in the small town of Mount Airy, North Carolina. This quiet southern town would later become the inspiration for the fictional Mayberry, where his famous TV show would be set. But Andy's early years were far from picture perfect. He grew up during the Great Depression, and money was always tight. His family lived with relatives for years because they couldn't afford a house of their own. Eventually, his father, Carl Lee Griffith, got a job as a carpenter, and they were able to move into their own modest home. Andy's childhood was shaped by strong religious values. He was raised in the Moravian Church, a Christian denomination that emphasized community and faith. He often went to church with his parents, and these experiences stayed with him for the rest of his life. Despite his later fame, Andy always carried those early teachings of humility and discipline. He was a quiet and shy child, more comfortable observing others than speaking up. This introverted nature would make his rise to stardom even more surprising later on. As a boy, Andy was fascinated by music and stories. He listened to records, read books, and watched traveling performers whenever he got the chance. He was especially drawn to the idea of performing. At first, he thought he might become a preacher. He loved the way pastors told stories from the pulpit and how their words moved people. But as he grew older, that dream began to shift. The more he saw people entertained through music and humor, the more he realized that performing could also touch people's hearts. After high school, Andy attended the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He majored in music and trained as a classical singer. He had a deep baritone voice and took his studies seriously. But it wasn't just music that caught his attention. While at UNC, he discovered his talent for comedy and storytelling. He began performing humorous monologues, often using a slow Southern drawl that made everything funnier. One of his earliest and most popular pieces was What It Was Football. This routine told the story of a naive countryman trying to describe a football game without understanding what it was. It became a huge hit. The monologue got picked up by a local record label and quickly spread beyond North Carolina. Andy was soon performing it on radio shows, in nightclubs, and even on national TV. People loved his natural delivery, his down-home charm, and the way he brought simple stories to life. This was the first time he experienced real fame. His ability to mix music, humor, and storytelling set him apart from other performers of the time. But this was just the beginning. Soon, Andy would go from small clubs to the bright lights of Broadway. Stepping into stardom. Andy Griffith's path to fame really started to take off in the 1950s, and it all began on the stage. In 1955, he made his Broadway debut in a play called No Time for Sergeants. The role was a perfect fit for him. He played a country boy named Will Stockdale, who joins the U.S. Air Force. Andy's natural Southern charm, his timing, and his ability to bring humor into every line made the character unforgettable. The play was a huge success, and even earned Andy a Tony Award nomination. It was clear that he wasn't just a small-town performer anymore. He was a national name. During the run of No Time for Sergeants, Andy met another actor who would become a major part of his career and life, Don Knotts. Don played a nervous and talkative fellow soldier in the play, and the chemistry between the two men was instant. Their back-and-forth rhythm on stage was sharp, funny, and believable. This connection would turn into one of the most beloved comedic duos on television just a few years later. By the late 1950s, Andy was becoming a familiar face. He had appeared in some TV specials and a few movies, including the film version of No Time for Sergeants. But his big break into television came in 1960. That year, he appeared as a guest star on The Danny Thomas Show as a small-town sheriff. CBS saw potential in the idea. They approached Andy about turning that one-time role into a full series. At first, CBS had other actors in mind, but Andy had already proven he could carry a show, and more importantly, he wanted creative control. That gave him an edge. He agreed to do it, but only if he could have a say in how the show was made. That's how The Andy Griffith Show was born. It aired from 1960 to 1968 and quickly became one of the most popular shows on television. The show was set in the fictional town of Mayberry, which was clearly based on Andy's real hometown of Mount Airy, North Carolina. Many fans believed Andy created the entire world of Mayberry, but in truth, the network and its writers helped shape the tone and characters. Still, Andy had a strong influence over the show's feel. He pushed for a quiet, wholesome atmosphere that focused on simple stories, warm humor, and strong characters. One of the smartest choices Andy made was who he brought onto the show. Don Knotts returned as Deputy Barney Fife, and their chemistry picked up right where it had left off. Don's high-energy, anxious character was the perfect match for Andy's calm, steady sheriff. Young Ron Howard was cast as Andy's son, Opie. He was only 6 years old at the time, but Andy saw something special in him. Frances Bavier was chosen to play Aunt Bee, the stern but loving matriarch of the household. The cast worked well together, and their connection helped the show feel real and heartfelt. As the show became more successful, Andy took on more responsibilities behind the scenes. Though he wasn't always listed as a producer early on, he acted like one. He helped shape the scripts, directed episodes, and made important casting decisions. He had strong opinions on tone and pacing. He wanted the show to avoid cheap laughs and instead said, focus on real characters and honest storytelling. That drive helped keep the show consistent. But it also revealed another side of Andy that many didn't see. People who worked with him started to notice that Andy could be intense. He was a perfectionist who demanded a lot from himself and those around him. He wasn't known for yelling or causing public drama, but behind the scenes, he could be moody and controlling. Some cast and crew said he didn't like being challenged. He wanted things done his way, and if they weren't, he let people know, often in subtle but powerful ways. These traits didn't make him unkind, but they showed that he took his work very seriously and could be difficult when stressed. Even as the show continued to win fans and praise, Andy was already thinking ahead. He didn't want to be stuck in one role forever, and part of him was getting restless. Coming up next, we'll look at Andy's complicated personal life, including his marriages, secret affair, and the side of him few fans ever saw. Marriages and divorces. Andy Griffith may have played the calm, kind-hearted Sheriff Andy Taylor on television, but his real life was much more complicated. Behind the camera, he lived through 3 marriages, a rumored long-term affair, and emotional struggles that clashed with the public image he became known for. Andy's first wife was Barbara Bray Edwards. They met in college at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and married in 1949, just as Andy's career in music and comedy was beginning to grow. Barbara was a singer and actress herself. In those early years, she supported Andy's ambitions completely. The two seemed like a great match, working together to build his career. As Andy began touring with his monologues and stage performances, Barbara was often by his side. The couple couldn't have children of their own, so they adopted 2, a son named Sam and a daughter named Dixie. On the outside, their family looked picture perfect. They lived together in North Carolina for a while, before moving to New York and eventually California as Andy's fame grew. But success brought pressure. As The Andy Griffith Show became more popular, Andy spent more time on set and less time at home. Over time, the marriage started to fall apart. Some of the strain came from Andy's rising fame. He was constantly working, and Barbara often felt left behind. There were also rumors that Andy had affairs during this period, although he never admitted to them publicly. Still, those around the couple noticed the growing distance. By the early 1970s, the relationship was no longer working. In 1972, after the 23 years of marriage, Andy and Barbara divorced. It was a difficult time for the entire family, especially for their son Sam, who would later struggle with addiction and legal trouble. Not long after his divorce, Andy married again. His second wife was Solika Kasuto, a Greek actress. The marriage began in 1973. Solika was younger than Andy and had a very different background. She wasn't part of the Hollywood scene in the same way, and while she was supportive of Andy, the two never seemed to connect on a deep level the way he had with Barbara. There's not a lot of public information about their relationship, partly because Andy became more private during this time. He was doing fewer public appearances and taking on different types of acting roles. What is known is that the marriage didn't last long. By 1981, they quietly divorced. Neither of them spoke much about the breakup, and there were no dramatic headlines. Most people didn't even realize Andy had been married a second time, unless they followed his career very closely. Andy's third and final marriage was to Cindy Knight. They met in 1981 when she was working as an actress in a play where Andy had a small role. Cindy was much younger than Andy, about 28 years younger, but they quickly developed a strong bond. She was loyal, calm, and supportive, and she seemed to understand Andy's need for privacy. They married in 1983, and Cindy stayed with Andy for nearly 30 years until his death in 2012. Unlike his previous marriages, this one was more stable. By this time, Andy had slowed down professionally and focused more on his home life. He and Cindy lived in a peaceful house on Roanoke Island in North Carolina, far from the Hollywood spotlight. Cindy kept a low profile and rarely gave interviews, but those who knew them said she was deeply devoted to Andy and helped take care of him in his later years when his health declined. The Secret Affair. While Andy was married during much of the Andy Griffith Show's original run, there were long-standing rumors about a romantic relationship between him and Annetta Corsott, who played schoolteacher Helen Crump. Annetta was Andy's on-screen love interest, and many believe that the relationship continued off-screen as well. Several sources close to the show claimed that Andy and Annetta were involved for many years, including during his second marriage. The affair was never officially confirmed by either of them. Andy was known to be a very private man, and Annetta was also careful about what she said publicly. Still, the gossip persisted for decades. People who worked on the show later said the chemistry between them was very real, and that their connection went beyond acting. If the rumors are true, it shows a side of Andy that fans didn't see. A man who could be deeply passionate, but also secretive. In the eyes of the public, Andy Griffith was America's dad. He was the wise, kind, and funny figure that millions of people welcomed into their living rooms every week. But the real Andy was more complicated. He was driven, sometimes moody, and deeply protective of his personal life. He had a strong need for control, both in his work and in his relationships. While he could be warm and caring, he could also be distant and hard to reach. His personal life didn't always match the clean-cut image of Sheriff Taylor. He had marital struggles, a rumored affair, and a private side he rarely let anyone see. These contradictions made Andy a more human figure, not perfect, but real. His life off-screen had moments of love and loyalty, but also conflict and regret. Anger, alcohol, and control. Andy Griffith had a warm smile and calm voice that made him seem like the friendliest man in America. On screen, he was the wise and gentle sheriff Andy Taylor, someone who always knew the right thing to say and never lost his temper. But behind the scenes, things were very different. Andy struggled with anger, control, and drinking, and many people who worked closely with him saw a side that fans never did. During the filming of The Andy Griffith Show, Andy was under a lot of pressure. He wanted the show to be perfect, and he often felt responsible for its success. This pressure sometimes came out in the form of anger. Crew members and castmates later said that Andy could have serious mood swings. He was known for having sudden outbursts, especially when things didn't go the way he wanted on set. While he never became physically violent, his temper made people uncomfortable. He could be cold, sharp with his words, and very demanding. One issue that added to this behavior was alcohol. Andy had a drinking problem, especially during the height of his fame in the 1960s. It wasn't something he talked about openly at the time, and most fans had no idea. But people who worked on the show said that he sometimes came to work in a bad mood after drinking, or he would drink after filming to deal with stress. The alcohol didn't cause public scenes, but it made his behind-the-scenes behavior harder to manage. It affected how he treated others, especially if he was already feeling frustrated. Andy also had tension with some of his co-stars. His most well-known clash was with Frances Bavier, who played Aunt Bee. While their characters had a warm and loving relationship on screen, the truth was very different off-camera. Frances was a serious actress who took her work very personally, and Andy didn't always have patience for that. He found her difficult to work with, and she thought he was rude and dismissive. According to several people from the cast, the two had a deep mutual dislike for each other. Frances rarely joined the rest of the cast for social gatherings, and the tension between her and Andy was obvious to those on set. She later admitted to having regrets about not getting along with him. Andy's relationship with young Ron Howard was more complicated. He cared deeply about Ron and often acted like a father figure. He protected him from harsh criticism and gave him advice. But at the same time, Andy could also be condescending. He expected a lot from Ron, even though he was just a child during most of the show's run. Andy would sometimes speak sharply to him or correct him in front of others. It came from a place of high expectations, but it could still be intimidating. Ron later said that he always respected Andy. But there were moments when the mood on set felt tense. One reason for all this stress was that Andy was a near perfectionist. He had strong opinions about how scenes should be written, performed, and edited. He often asked for rewrites or changes to scripts, even at the last minute. He sometimes demanded extra takes because he wasn't happy with the way a scene came out. These high standards helped make the show great, but they also created a lot of pressure for everyone involved. Writers, directors, and actors all had to work extra hard to meet Andy's expectations, and they often walked on eggshells around him. Despite all this, Andy was never seen as abusive or cruel. He wasn't known to scream or throw things, but his mood and presence could change the whole energy of the room. Younger or less experienced cast and crew members found him especially intimidating. They never knew if they were going to meet the kind, smiling Andy or the serious, frustrated one. He kept people guessing, and that could make working with him stressful. Later in his life, Andy seemed to reflect on his past behavior. In one interview, he admitted that he wasn't always a nice guy, especially when under stress. He didn't give specific examples, but the comment was enough to confirm what many of his co-workers had already said. Andy knew he had been difficult at times, and it seems he carried some guilt about that. Ron Howard, friendship or control? Andy Griffith and Ron Howard shared one of the most well-known partnerships in classic television. Their on-screen bond as Sheriff Andy Taylor and young Opie felt real because, in many ways, it was. Andy took Ron under his wing from the very beginning of The Andy Griffith Show, and their relationship quickly turned into more than just a working one. Andy became a mentor and, in some ways, a second father to Ron. But their friendship also had its struggles, especially as Ron grew up and found major success on his own. When The Andy Griffith Show began in 1960, Ron Howard was just 6 years old. Even at that age, he was already acting professionally, but Andy Griffith was the show that made him a household name. Andy recognized Ron's natural talent early on. He often gave Ron advice, helped him understand scenes, and created a comfortable environment for him to perform. Andy was very protective of Ron, especially around the pressures of working on a TV set. Many cast members noticed how Andy always made sure Ron was treated with kindness and patience. As the show continued, Ron's performance skills got better and Andy encouraged him. He supported Ron's curiosity when it came to writing and directing, even when Ron was still a teenager. Andy reportedly told Ron more than once that he believed he would someday be a great filmmaker. That early belief stuck with Ron, and he later credited Andy for helping build his confidence, not just as an actor, but as a creative person. However, their relationship wasn't always easy. Andy could be very controlling, and some people who worked on the show said he was possessive of Ron. He expected a lot from him and sometimes corrected or directed him sharply. To the outside world, it might have seemed like discipline, but insiders saw it as Andy trying to shape Ron in his own image. Andy had strong ideas about what a scene should feel like, and he didn't always give Ron room to explore things on his own. After The Andy Griffith Show ended in 1968, Ron went on to act in Happy Days and then later moved into directing, eventually becoming one of Hollywood's most successful filmmakers. While Andy was publicly supportive of Ron's achievements, people close to him said there may have been mixed emotions. Some believed that Andy felt a little left behind. His own post-show career had its ups and downs, while Ron's star kept rising. There were even quiet rumors that Andy resented how far Ron had gone, especially since Ron had once been the little boy he helped guide. Over time, the two began reconnecting. They appeared together in reunion specials and TV movies, such as Return to Mayberry in 1986. They also worked together on retrospectives about the show. These moments showed that, despite past distance, there was still real affection between them. Before Andy's death in 2012, the two had made peace. Ron visited Andy several times during his later years, and it's clear that their bond, even with all its complexities, remained strong. So was Andy Griffith a father figure or a control freak? The truth is, he may have been both. He gave Ron Howard opportunities and guidance that shaped his entire career, but he also placed expectations and pressure on a young actor who was still figuring things out. Their friendship wasn't perfect. It was real, human, and sometimes messy. But the deeper you go into Andy's later years, the more it becomes clear how much those early bonds and the weight of fame shaped the rest of his life, especially as his health started to fade. That's what we'll look at next. Health struggles and isolation. Andy's health began to decline noticeably in the early 1980s. One of the first major setbacks came when he was diagnosed with Guillain-Barré syndrome, a rare disorder where the immune system attacks the nerves. In Andy's case, it caused temporary paralysis from the knees down. He spent several months in recovery and had to relearn how to walk. It was a frightening time, and although he eventually recovered, it left a lasting impact on his strength and mobility. The health issues didn't end there. In 2000, Andy underwent quadruple heart bypass surgery, which is a serious procedure that reroutes blood flow around blocked arteries. It was another reminder that his body was slowing down. Over the years, he also dealt with chronic pain and limited mobility. By the time he reached his 70s and 80s, he rarely made public appearances and was often seen walking with a cane. As his health declined, Andy became more and more private. He spent most of his final years at his coastal estate on Roanoke Island in North Carolina. The home sat by the water, far from Hollywood, and gave him the peace he craved. He no longer sought out attention, preferring to spend his days in quiet routines, supported by his third wife, Cindy Knight. The couple lived a low-key life, surrounded by nature and away from the press. One of the more painful and less talked-about parts of Andy's later life was his relationship with his adopted son, Sam Griffith. Andy had adopted Sam as a young child with his first wife, Barbara. As Sam grew up, he had trouble finding stability. He struggled with addiction and had frequent run-ins with the law. There were reports of serious tension between Andy and Sam. Some sources claimed they were estranged in the years before Sam's death, though the details were never fully confirmed by the family. What is known is that Sam died in 1996 at just 38 years old, reportedly from complications related to substance abuse. Andy did not speak publicly about his son's death in any great detail, but those close to him said it broke his heart. In the last years of his life, Andy remained on his North Carolina estate, surrounded by a small circle of family and caregivers. He continued to avoid public events and focused on his health and peace of mind. He passed away on July 3, 2012, at age 86 due to a heart attack. In keeping with his wishes, he was buried just hours later in a private ceremony without any media coverage. Ron Howard breaks silence. Ron Howard is finally breaking his silence about Andy Griffith, and what he's sharing paints a picture that's both warm and deeply human. After years of keeping most of his reflections private, Howard has opened up about his earliest memories of Griffith, their complicated bond, and the lasting impact the legendary actor had on him. Howard first met Griffith when he was just 5 years old, preparing to film a scene on The Andy Griffith Show. He remembers holding a toy turtle, which he had to pretend was real and dead. The scene required him to cry, but he was confused and distracted. Griffith gently helped him through it. I remember him looking at that little turtle and talking to me about how it was kind of funny to have to pretend that it was dead, Howard recalled. That first interaction left Howard with a sense of calm and reassurance, even at such a young age. Throughout his time on the show, Howard says Griffith was fantastic. He created a warm, supportive environment where jokes and laughter were common, but the work always got done. Griffith had a talent for balancing humor with professionalism. He made the set fun, but he was also serious about getting things right. Howard admired this about him and said that it shaped his own approach to acting and directing later in life. Howard also emphasized Griffith's work ethic. Behind the scenes, he was focused, committed, and humble. He wasn't showy or demanding, but he had very high standards. He didn't talk much about it. He just led by example with quiet dedication. Over the years, their relationship went through long gaps. After the show ended, they didn't stay in touch regularly, but in Griffith's later years, they began talking again. They shared several phone conversations during the last year of Griffith's life, and Howard described those talks as meaningful and warm. Howard now hopes fans remember Griffith as a man who truly loved people. He had a great sense of humor about life, he said. Griffith appreciated the quirks in others, and that same love for everyday folks was what made The Andy Griffith Show so special. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video.